All good things have to end at some point, and the Winnipeg Jets' incredible streak of 34 straight games of 3 goals or less conceded has finally come to a close. They were beaten by the Boston Bruins, and we'll dive into how that happened on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is completely free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, like I said, the Jets obviously just finally found the end of their incredible 3 goals or less conceded streak, 34 straight games, very nearly coming to a tie with Minnesota. I think that was the 2014-2015 season where they had like 35 straight games of this. It was one of the most improbable, unexpected, and incredible streaks the Winnipeg Jets have ever gone on. And I think, let's be honest, right? It was a lot of pressure. You know, the Jets have been winning a lot of games recently, but knowing that you kind of had not only that, but a defensive goals conceded streak to go along with it probably was something that sits at the back of all of their minds. And at some point, you know it had to end, right? The Jets couldn't be invincible or very nearly invincible forever. And finally, unfortunately, the Jets met their match. This was, a game against the Boston Bruins where I think we all pretty much knew this would probably be the end of the streak, right? The Jets went into Boston without Scheifele and Vilardi. And look, Winnipeg has, gone through a lot of adversity over the course of the season. And you know what? They've generally been able to get through it. But there is a point at which, you can't just will your way to victory. And Winnipeg, unfortunately, hit a bit of a snag where, for a couple of periods tonight, the Jets got bossed around, if we're being honest. The Bruins really had their way with Winnipeg's defensive structure. They exposed Winnipeg's transition game. They torched Winnipeg's blue line. And for all of those efforts, it wasn't until late in the game when the Jets were finally put out of their misery, I guess, right? Winnipeg actually made a really good fight of it, especially in the third period. I thought once they made a few line changes, swapped a few guys around, suddenly there was life with the Jets, and they got close to scoring a couple of times. Jeremy Swayman basically robbed Winnipeg probably 2 to 3 times. There were some backdoor tap-ins that should have been enough to tie the game, perhaps even get a winner, but the Jets unfortunately just fell short, and despite some strong efforts late in the game, they unfortunately just could not hit pay dirt, and ultimately, the Bruins got an empty netter. That was the 4th goal against, and so ends the streak. So a bit of a bitter pill for Winnipeg, but by the same token, the fact that we were even on the streak is truly incredible. Not only did that end the 3 goals or less streak, it also ended the 2 goals or less conceded streak too, which I believe now finishes at 14 straight games. An incredible run from the Jets. Like I said, I mean, it sucks, but it's not really something that I'm losing any particular sleep over. I think we all knew that at some point something just had to give, and Winnipeg wasn't going to be perfect forever, right? The Jets had to give up something along the way here and probably see an end of the streak. You couldn't get to this point and not be at risk of blowing it at some rate. And, losing Scheifele and Vilardi kind of sealed Winnipeg's fate. I mean, let's be honest. If the Jets were just down Scheifele or Vilardi, maybe they'd get through, but losing both, well, suddenly you were starting to see some real gaps in Winnipeg's roster when you start losing some key players. And that's not to say that Winnipeg is a bad team, right? Obviously, that's not even close to that. And no one is saying that the Jets should go out and trade for a Mark Scheifele or something. But it might be helpful for Winnipeg to start considering some options. And we'll talk about why that's kind of becoming increasingly clear later in the episode, and what some potential roster substitutions might look like. But so far, the Jets just kind of ran out of gas. And I think we've seen, the last few games, Winnipeg starting to wear down a little bit. And I think, for the Jets, this has been one of the most turbulent, busiest parts of the season. Winnipeg has had to weather some major injuries. There's a stomach bug going around, and the schedule has just been not super forgiving, right? Not all of the opponents have been top class, but the Jets have had to play a lot of teams. The travel, the frequency of games, all of that hasn't really given the Jets a lot of time to breathe. And sure, they might not have had like a million back-to-backs, but you can tell that all of that fatigue is starting to catch up to Winnipeg. And I think in the past handful of games, you've really started to notice the impact on Winnipeg's ability to create at 5v5. I think this is one of those things where it's just the accumulation of fatigue, injuries, and some interesting deployments from the coaching staff. Even still, we have a couple of those moments where you're kind of like, well, I don't know about that decision so much. But, otherwise, I mean, Winnipeg is going to start a new streak here pretty soon. I'm not too concerned. At some point, this amazing run had to come to a conclusion. So now it's just time for the Jets to start another one and impress us once again. We all know that they're capable of it. I don't know that they're going to necessarily do it, but the only thing that I really care about is the Jets ending up in the playoffs and going on a deep run. Streak be darned, I think the Jets are well on their way to that. So, props to the team. Let's hope that they can come back stronger than ever. Now, I did allude to the fact that the Jets are pretty tired, and I thought I would talk about why, the last couple of games and then a huge break for the Jets could be exactly what the doctor ordered. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors says everything you need to maintain your car and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the victory. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends. Welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just sort of walking through, what has been a bit of a tough stretch for the Jets the past couple of games. Obviously, they did come away with some victories against the Islanders and the Ottawa Senators last week. But now, of course, they have lost to the Bruins. And you could tell that there was some stuff probably building up that has put the Jets in a slightly less than advantageous position heading into a couple of really big games against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Before we talk about, this recent stretch and some trends that have emerged, just wanted to shout out something really cool that the Locked On Network is doing. We have launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with our local experts and our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now, like I said, the Jets, I talked a little bit just a few minutes ago about Winnipeg starting to slow down. Fatigue might finally be catching up to the Jets, and I think we've noticed that their skating legs the last few games haven't really been as strong as they were at the start of the season. And I think there have been some questions as to why. Obviously, the first and easiest answer is that, let's be honest, right? the Jets losing Scheifele has had a very big impact on this lineup's depth. You've noticed a lot of guys getting promoted who probably haven't been, playing a ton of minutes, now asked to play significantly elevated roles. And while that can be good for guys who are maybe, maybe could use a few extra shifts here and there, overall, right, I think the trend is that you're asking more from a lot of players. You're asking more from some of your top guys to help try and compensate. And that over time just eventually wears you down. And I think in particular with the Jets, a lot of it comes down to how Rick Bowness wants this team to play. It has been really noticeable that this team defensively has been a juggernaut this year, right? And that's partly because Winnipeg doubles back and really tries to fight for second chances, correct mistakes, and be very aggressive to intercept problems or cover up mistakes that they've made routinely. And all of that extra energy expended does kind of come with the toll, right? The Jets play at times an extremely aggressive press. That's the closest thing I can call it. In soccer, this is the concept where you close off space, you pressure as a team and as a unit to force mistakes, to defensively make quick recoveries, and to spring counters. That's kind of how the Jets have played this year. And at some point, you do suspect that, well, Winnipeg can only get away with doing that for so long before at times, the fatigue does start to set in. And we're halfway past the point of the season, the midway point. We're past the point of the midway point of the season. So this is the sort of stuff where I think, just the accumulation of exhaustion and the amount of energy the Jets have expended really couldn't have happened at a better time for the Jets, as we have a couple of games against the Leafs and then the All-Star break. So Winnipeg is about to get a big breather, a nice long one, and I think this team could absolutely use it. I will say that the past few games we've noticed that the Jets at 5v5 haven't nearly been as strong as we're used to. I think the Islanders and Sens gave the Jets a bit of a scare. Chicago at one point did too. Not as many dominant wins as we're used to seeing. And then the Bruins, of course, just kind of paddled the Jets for half the game before Winnipeg started to come back and make a big game of it. So, Winnipeg, I think they are just very happy to be close to the break. They have kind of started to crawl a little bit the past few games. And this is a point where, now the Jets have had enough rest, at least with some of their injuries, to get a couple of guys back. Scheifele and Vilardi are hopefully going to be good to go against the Leafs. I think Scheifele is at least confirmed. Vilardi might still be a little bit of a game time decision. He's had a nagging injury of some sort. Could be one of the situations like tonight where he might have to sit out for at least one more game. But I just hope at least that we are definitely getting Scheifele back, because this team desperately needs him. I think having watched this team with and without him, you can really tell how much of a difference his presence in the lineup alone makes when it kind of changes the rest of your line combinations. So that could be good. I also just think, Winnipeg has definitely played a really hard style of hockey. And, with a couple of major injuries over the last few months, it's just a great time for the All-Star game to be happening. The Jets get about a week off. They'll have some time to themselves, see some family, recharge, and get ready for what will be a very, very busy back half of the season. Winnipeg has already started it off against a couple of reasonably decent opponents, but now, there's a lot of teams that are going to be behind them in the playoff standings that are trying to catch up, and the Jets are going to have a chance to bury them permanently. So Winnipeg is on a great trajectory. I think we've all established that throughout the season. Now it's time to just get some rest, recuperate, and heal up, especially for guys like Scheifele and Vilardi, Ehlers, Perfetti. All of these dudes are seemingly nursing something. This is as good of a time and opportunity as any to get healthy and get ready for what will be, like I said, a very busy second half of the season. This is the time of the year where we're really going to find out what Winnipeg is made of. And so far, they've really answered the bell about as much as you can ask. Obviously, the special teams, maybe not so great. I will say that the power play continues to look really not good. But hey, at least the PK did a great job against the Bruins. Maybe they have finally started to apply a little more pressure and figure out ways to make that part of the special teams a little bit better. Now, earlier I did mention one thing about the Jets perhaps needing to make a trade, and we'll talk about some obvious and more crystallizing needs that I think we've seen as the Jets are kind of showing us where the gaps are, right? I know like injuries are naturally going to change your roster's composition, but I think I've talked about it before. I've mentioned that I think the Jets had a couple of things I would like to see them acquire, and these injuries have sort of confirmed some of those suspicions for me. We'll talk about the particular positions of need and the likelihood of filling them in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Obviously, for those of you who are, ready for the finals, the conference championships are coming up. This is a big deal. I'm excited as a Ravens fan. This has been one of the best runs that I've ever gotten to see. Maybe for you Vikings fans, not so great. It's been a little bit of a turbulent time. I am sorry that your season did not end in the best of lights. But you know what? No matter what, you can still win big by placing a $5 bet. You get $150 in bonus, but $150 in bonus bets back, guaranteed, win or lose. That's always nice, right? A chance to use those extra bets on live same game parlays, bets under the new Explorer tab, parlays from the Parlay Hub that are the most popular ones, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an easy extra point. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are wrapping up with some quick thoughts about the Jets needing to make a trade. I know we've talked about it before. I know a lot of you have your own opinions, and a lot of you have disagreed and suggested the Jets really shouldn't be making a trade. But I think, if anything, the last few games have shown that Winnipeg kind of actually does need to make a trade. I think the lack of center depth has kind of become more and more apparent. And I know a lot of people will say the Jets have tons of centers, and that is absolutely true. And some of them are really good. Like Lowry has had a great season. Nemesnikov has been very good. Scheifele is great. The problem for Winnipeg is that the roles that they've been asked to play, they're very good at those roles. What the Jets need is kind of like insurance to push this team over the top. They don't need to acquire like somebody like Mark Scheifele, right? They're not going to find another one of those on the market unless some team goes crazy and liquidates at a price that the Jets can't turn down, right? But let's be real, right? The Jets are just not going to find anyone of Scheifele's caliber. Instead, I think Winnipeg would be better served trying to find a guy who can kind of be at least a bit of a stabilizing force, right? A second line center that is creative, that can be defensively responsible, and that can get this team, even more balanced centrally than they already have. The Jets, like I said, they have pretty good center depth, but as soon as you lose a big player like Scheifele, you start to see some major gaps. Lowry and Nemesnikov can only carry so much of the offensive burden before you probably start thinking about maybe bringing in somebody with a bit more of an offensive punch. And like I said, there's some interesting options out there. Casey Middlestad's a name that I keep seeing mentioned in the ether. I don't know if he is a player that the Jets are necessarily going after. I would actually prefer him over some of the other options. I think he'd be really good. If the Jets really do want to swing big and they try to go for Lindholm, all I'll say is like Lindholm for me this year, just, and even like last year, just isn't the player that he used to be. Now, does that mean he still isn't effective? Well, no, not necessarily. He might be a really good shooter, and he might even fit in nicely with this team. But I feel like for what I want the Jets to get out of this, Middlestad might legitimately be one of the better choices. Now, they could also go really crazy and try to lure Claude Giroux out of Ottawa. I know that really exists in the realm of fantasy, and I think for a lot of reasons, there's just not necessarily an alignment of interests there. But if, Giroux kind of looks at the situation, realizes that perhaps, the amount of time that he has to chase the ring is shrinking, and, he's got a year left after this, the Sens aren't getting better anytime soon. The Jets have exactly about a year and a half in their window with this current core. Winnipeg could probably find a way to make the salary work. And in a lot of ways, you know what? The Jets probably have among the highest chances of any single team out there to win a trophy. And you know what? If you had a 1-2 punch of Scheifele and Giroux, let's be real, right? It'd be crazy. Now, Giroux isn't playing center all that recently. I don't know if he'd prefer to play out wide in this case. If he would to, were to join the Jets, like obviously it doesn't even matter, right? Whether he plays at center or plays at wing, he is an elite addition. Likewise, if you got like a Buchnevich, who's definitely a winger, obviously that would just give the Jets some elite finishing talent and two-way transition game. It would also probably reduce the pressure and the need for like a second line center. I think for me, though, I would still probably look at a player that can go down the middle, whether it's Middlestat or Lindholm or somebody of that caliber. At this point, just find somebody. Henrique may be an option. I know Adam is kind of aging and he's not the young, underrated talent that he used to be, but he could probably do a reasonable job. And I think Bones would trust him. That's another thing that I think is a little underrated, but also very important, is whether or not Rick would actually give him minutes. Bones definitely has a couple of ways that he really likes to deploy his lines. And if you don't fit that mold, you are not getting ice time. So Henrique could probably do the job reasonably well. The one guy I really want to avoid and who just came up with some crazy rumors today, it's Sean Monahan. I've seen something suggesting that he could cost as much as 2 firsts. I don't know who is smoking on that one, but whatever they're up to and whatever they're smoking, I want to hit of that because it's got to be really strong. 2 firsts for Monahan is like highway robbery. I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. And look, Monahan's having a pretty decent season for $900K, but I promise you the Jets could probably find a reasonable alternative that maybe costs just a little bit more, but is a much more well-rounded, more bonesy kind of player than that. I think Monahan would not be able to replicate his success here. I don't really feel that he's exactly what the Jets need anyways. And I'm happy for him that he's doing reasonably well with the Habs. But if you look at the underlying numbers and the way that he's scoring, it's just not a way that looks particularly sustainable. And it doesn't look like a fit for the Jets. I've seen Monahan in previous years anyways. He is talented. He's got a great shot, but I feel like the transition game, the passing and stuff that you really want from him, and the creativity, he's not that kind of player. He would play an all right bottom 6 role, but I can't imagine that the Jets would want him for only that. So, unless the Jets are really getting a bargain price on him for like a 3rd round pick or something, the Jets should probably steer well clear. I also think the Jets would probably do well with making an upgrade on the defense. I think this is one of those games against the Bruins where we really saw the need for like a two-way puck mover that can be a really aggressive type, good edge work, good skating, and good passing, and great vision. And the Jets might just have that internally in Ville Heinola. So Heinola looks like he's doing really well with the Moose. There's been a couple of highlights from him already being shared. He looks a lot like he did with the Jets when he was in preseason. Great passing, confident and controlled with the puck. This might be the time to start letting him get some games. If he can be that transformative presence in place of maybe somebody like Schmidt, this would give the Jets a lot more flexibility to figure out, maybe sinking some big assets for an even better, higher end forward instead of having to split between, a second line center and a top 4D. Now, I'm not going to say that Heinola can immediately step in and do that, but this would be the time to find out if he's prepared for it. He's seemingly recovering well with the Moose. I think it's, high time that we really start to see what his NHL potential is, and he remains one of our most exciting puck-moving blue liners not named Declan Chisholm. So if the Jets are really ready for this, I am too. I think it's probably time to give him a call up, and, let's see what the kid can do. He's very skilled. He's at times an extremely strong transition provider from the back end. He can also be a really good PPQB. And you know what? Bones actually seemed to trust him a good deal during the preseason. So if this is the kind of player that Heinola can become under Rick, another perhaps Morrissey light, that I think would be the best case scenario for the Jets. And it would also give Winnipeg some really great flexibility at the trade deadline. So a lot to consider for the Jets. Let me know what you think about the current roster situation. Do you think the Jets really should just hold firm, or is it time to start thinking about the trade deadline and how Winnipeg can really add that extra bit of insurance somewhere to this team to really put us in the best spot possible. Look, we're not going to sit here and pretend that losing Scheifele or Vilardi isn't massively impactful, but if you can soften the damage and give yourself 1 or 2 extra games in the playoffs to maybe get somebody back later in the series, that could be the difference between advancing to, a second or a third round and exiting, prematurely. So a lot to consider. Let's hope the Jets make the right call and bring us, whatever gets us the deepest playoff run possible. But like I said, drop your thoughts in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have, though. Tomorrow's episode, I'll probably go back through some of the Boston and Ottawa games and kind of talk in some general terms, some bigger trends that we're noticing recently. I know that we've alluded to them in this episode, but we'll do a little bit more, tactical dive-ins, maybe some discussions about some of the deployments and how the Jets can better optimize the lines when they are facing an injury crisis like this. But like I said, that is all the time that we have for tonight's episode. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We will see you back here tomorrow with even more exciting Jets coverage, so don't go anywhere. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets, go.